My name is Elizabeth Donoff. I'll make some brief introductions for our panelists, and then I'll introduce myself. From the end, Jose Dos Santos is trained as an industrial designer and is presently the head of design and user experience here at Signify for the Americas region. Next, Yihyun Lim, who we met this morning, the director of the MIT Design Lab. There she directs a multidisciplinary group of researchers. She's an architect by training and has practiced in San Francisco, Seoul, and New York prior to going to MIT. To Yihyun's right is Tapio Rosenius. Tapio is presently the CEO of Scandal Technologies, which is a new technology startup developing ambient communication systems for the built environment. He's trained in architectural lighting design and was the founder of the Lighting Design Collective, which has practices in Madrid, Helsinki, and London. And to Tapio's right is Arlon Bayliss, who is an artist, sculptor, glassmaker, trained at the Royal College of Art in London. He established the glass program at Anderson University in Indiana in 1990. And some of his works you might have seen during your travels. His piece Flight Wave is at the Indianapolis International Airport. And in 2018, he delivered the closing keynote for the ILD Enlighten Americas conference in Seattle. Some of you I know. My name is Elizabeth Donoff again, and until the end of 2017, I was the editor-in-chief of Architectural Lighting magazine. My background is in architecture, and I made this migration to design journalism, and now I'm presently working on a series of independent writing and editing projects. It's time to sort of bring these ideas about technology and design together, and what that means in our digital world, and what would happen if we create something called the Internet of People. So we will have a discussion with our panelists, and then we will certainly leave time to open the discussion up to you, the audience, and get even more thoughts and opinions on this issue, which is, I think, probably one of the most pressing issues in the realm of design today as we navigate this world. Technology is clearly a driving force in our contemporary life. As we navigate this 24/7 world and the analog to digital shift, the question remains, how do we navigate technological transformations? What role does and can lighting play as we develop new tools, methods of work, and create today's and tomorrow's environments? That's a hefty amount of things to think about, but I know that we will be able to, through the research, architecture, manufacturing, and artistic lenses that each of our panelists approach their work through, I think it will provide us some dynamic conversation. So the first point of discussion I wanted to start with is just to sort of step back from a 30,000-foot view and think about what role does lighting play in a digital society? We don't often have the opportunity to talk about that in a very sort of broad stroke term. I think this morning at the lab, some of the amazing research projects that you're working on, Yihyun, start to begin to address these issues. So I'd like to start there.
And start with me.
Sure.
Okay. So good to see you all again. So I think this may jump right into Tapio's work actually about ambient communications. And I think as we go more into connected devices and connected people through data, and also how as our environment gets more intelligent, our spaces, surfaces, the city and everything, I think what light can do in this context is this new mode of communication, new mode of communicating both emotions, information, and through pulsations of light. And this is nothing new, and it's been around as you know, as long as light has been around. But I think what we'll see more is how to use light to convey this information, and not just data and wayfinding and way to communicate basic information, but can we develop more advanced way of communicating through this ambient modes of communication? So back to ambient intelligence, and as we can use lighting to communicate those, I think that's what the role of light can play. And there are many others, and I think I've also mentioned about the 5 roles of light as a starter, but I would like to connect back to the Internet of Things and Internet of People and data.
So one of the other things I wanted to ask all of you in terms of this discussion about what role lighting can play in a digital society. So for the general public who's used to thinking about light and light fixtures as having one sort of primary function to deliver illumination, what are some of the steps to sort of change the mindset or re-educate a sort of broader population to think about light as more than just something that's providing illumination? Because I think that's in part central to this discussion about how we can think about light in broader terms in a digital age. Jose?
My feeling is that the majority of people that know lighting and know what lighting does do not necessarily connect that to any sort of digital platform or a digital revolution. I think that we are all very close to the, like we say, close to the fire, and so for us, the understanding that an LED is above all an electronic component that allows everything from attaching things to it to having an IP address, to having a personality, to having a name. And that means that it can be connected and do a lot of things. But for the majority of people, I think those two worlds do not exist connected in their lives. And it's funny because I still feel that a lot of people around us, sometimes lack of understanding will take them from being interested and curious to being quite afraid. When we start saying of all the things that lighting can do, because for them it is clearly a long path to what they understand to be the function, the role, and what lighting can do for them, to what now we, as a team and groups of people, are saying that lighting can do. So I find that a very interesting challenge for all of us, for Yihyun also with her work and her team, to navigate it, to help people understand all the benefits of that, because lack of understanding will switch people directly into fear mode of, suddenly lighting is there and you don't know anything about it. The next moment you're wondering, what's that lighting doing? And so we need to help people navigate from one path to another.
I'm wondering whether artists have a role in this. Artists have traditionally been in an area where they've trodden that line between fear and acceptance and introduced new thinking or new challenges to people. In some ways, it's always frightening, but we can think of lots of examples where art has challenged people's current thinking. And if you look at some of the developments in public art using new technologies, I think you can start to see that people are beginning to be exposed to that kind of thing in and art provides a sort of safe environment for that to happen.
And Tapio, your work has been sort of straddling traditional, let's say, design practice, and now with the work that you're doing with your new company, how are you seeing these worlds, this kind of interdisciplinary approach, chisel away at these topics?
Yeah, I mean, we stole a concept from MIT, which is called anti-disciplinary approach, because the sort of multidisciplinary somehow expects people to still work in some kind of silos where they belong to, whereas the anti-disciplinary is that lighting designer does coding and a coder does architecture and an architect cleans the toilet. So I like more that approach, and from that, basically what came out is kind of a quite organic, quite chaotic process and a lot of happy accidents. And there's also sort of a frustration behind all this, because I don't belong to this way of thinking that this discipline does that. So I'm an art school graduate. We did all sorts of things. I just got into the lighting aspect of it. But why can't I do the IT? Why can't I be the visual curator of everything? So we basically decided that everything is our problem. Everything belongs to us, but in a sort of collaborative way, of course. So the architect is still there and the interior designer is still there, but we mix and match much more. Now, we then very quickly hit a wall which is that when you start talking about, let's say, concepts like hyper-connected society, which sounds super futuristic, whereas in practice we are living it every day. There's nothing futuristic about it anymore. But when you start talking like that, and you start introducing concepts like that, the fear factor goes up, because people don't quite understand what it is that you're talking about, and then comes the question of, well, okay, but how would you actually then do this? Like, how do you execute? And from that, we then ended up being the innovators for the tools, because a lot of things boil down to a lack of tools. So if a lighting designer is to become more, let's say, open-ended profession, which I believe it should, then the tools have to be there to facilitate that process. Not everybody can possibly try to reinvent the tools again for themselves. So I think there's a long-winded answer, but it's basically going to show us a little bit the world that I operate in.
Light is an interesting medium because in and of itself, it's quite flexible. I mean, it's a material, you could say. It's an experience. It's an emotion. It has sort of kind of concrete as well as psychological aspects. But because it has a familiarity aspect to it for a broad population, does that give it some kind of advantage in being this entity that can help make this shift from the Internet of Things to the Internet of People?
I do think that light has all the power to help people navigate these different spaces and these different requirements. Tapio was talking about the tools. I also talk about the roles and about the different roles that people can have in this future of lighting, because for the same reason that there's a lot of people that like to migrate and do not respect, let's say, typical traditional roles, but there's still going to be people that will have professional roles in this future, and many of them do not even exist today. And as we shift from a very restricted, sometimes, way of doing lighting, where when you design something for a building, you design it, you install it, it's closed, and nobody kind of touches it or plays with it, and it's, you want it to last for a long time, all these codes around it. And then you're going into where lighting can do different things, can be a part of people's ecosystem, and also they will have a role. And if that starts to play, then you need to understand for yourself, what is it that we need to create as an ecosystem of tools, but also of inspiration and also of education, so that people then can use lighting adequately. So, because right now, it is actually this thing of either it's not there and I do not notice it, and to suddenly having a clear conscience of even just pure quality of lighting, what it can do. Arlon, the last time we were together, he was bringing out his glass pieces, and into a team of, 60, 80 people in the room, and he put down the lights, and he gave, projectors and little pieces of glass, and suddenly everybody in there was creating, was making all this power but that's a role that today doesn't exist, and even the role of play and the role of this attached to lighting. So it is an incredible opportunity that comes with that flexibility, with that responsibility, and I think that that's where the fun is for all the people that are in this domain.
Mm-hmm.
So is there some kind of, let's say, call it a re-education then of a design professional to think across these disciplines? Arliss, is there?
I think
going back to what light could be, in parallel to the Carrying Lights project that we were doing last year, we're also doing another parallel research into identifying or understanding meaning of or experience of sound. What is experience of food? So sound in terms of audio, we focused on audio and also food, which involved smell also. And within those, then we were also thinking about light. And most cases, we think about audio as something that's in the background, it's ambient. We don't really think about the experience of audio. And in this case, we asked and probed our users, or people that we know around, through interviews of what they think, or why, when they encounter sound, or light and smell, and what experiences that elicit. So we created this experience map, trying to map out all of the potential or possible experiences that people engage. And of course, there's the whole area of functional light or functional sound that puts you into the right mood. I want to be productive, so I control my light to specific things. I turn on music to do that. When I'm going out at night, I play this soundtrack so I can be in the mood. But at the same time, there's a whole experience of empathy, emotions, or feeling connected, cared for, and I think those all can be embedded in the experience of light, sound, and smell. So if we can go back down to those basic experiences and try to communicate that with the overall public, of this is what the experience that we're trying to create, and here are the tools that will enable that, whether it's Li-Fi or new term, types of technology, IoT, IoP. I think that will make people understand more. This is what I'm getting through this product or service.
I think people don't play unless they feel that they're in a safe environment. And I think creating a safe environment for people to play, whether they're your design team or whether they're a room full of school children, creating that environment in which people feel they can play is essential. And if that's trying new products or moving towards products that you'd like to see people embracing, then you've got to create that environment. And that's where I think the skill and the thinking and the idea of thinking not of the product, but of how we bring the product to people. And there's an educational teacher called Parker Palmer who talks about, the power of hospitality in the classroom. And I'm thinking, there's a lot that we could learn from that in terms of this question, in terms of bringing people to trying new things. I think people are much more likely to play with things that they're familiar with than things that are completely new and scary.
Oftentimes, lighting can be, people think of it in technical terms, and it can be quite scary. Over the last, let's say, decade or so, there's been the introduction of the lighting facts label on the side of light bulb boxes to help take this technical information and make it more accessible to people. Yet it's still, when people think about color temperature and lumens, and they're like, what is all of this? But in creating these environments where people feel comfortable and safe to experiment and explore and rethink their ideas, is there some other kind of vocabulary or methodology we should be using to sort of think about light in these new terms?
Well, this relates a little bit to your previous question as well. It's like, okay, what should lighting designers do, or what re-educate lighting designers, or whatever? And I think the answer is that you need to look for different set of problems. So what is it that your design is answering? So let's just say, traditionally it would have been answering those kind of questions about technical aspects, lumens and things. But now, maybe you should be answering, or at least looking for entirely different problems. So what we did with our design practice some time ago, we realized that we had really cool ideas and we wanted to do new things, but no one ever asked us to. So no client ever came to us and asked us to do what we wanted to do. And so every project you see on our website is basically just like a Trojan horse that's been smuggled into the project against the will of the client. And now, in order to brainwash them before rather than after, in order to unlock larger budgets, we came up with an idea called foreshadowing workshop. And we worked with a sociologist and everything else, and we put together a whole structure of extracting those problems in other words, a new brief from the client. So the client came to us and said, we have this building and we'd like you guys to do the lighting. And we said, okay, fine. And then we said, but can we have a workshop session next Thursday for 4 hours? Okay, fine, our facility manager will be there. I said, no, you need your CEO there, you need your marketing director there, you need, this kind of people, you need your decision makers there. And when a few times we managed to do that, the conversation went away from lighting instantly. And it went into much more interesting problems. And for example, one concept that came out of this was a meeting room with a sense of humor. Because meeting rooms in shared office spaces are places of anxiety. Either it's a good meeting and you're right in the middle, it's going really well, and your time runs out and there's a queue of people outside, and you kind of get this irritated feeling, and every meeting kind of ends up in a kind of negative note. So what if the lighting could anticipate the simple thing, like that your time is running out, and then do something stupid? Something like rainbow, like that. Breaks the ice, people laugh, ha ha ha. It's a room with sense of humor. Equally, it can then be room with empathy. So if the conversation gets very tense, the lighting can suggest and go into those kind of mood shifts and stuff like that. Now, that's lighting design. That's lighting designers' problem that they're answering. The value you're creating is a million times more than 500 lux on the table. You're not anymore discussing those things, so the whole technical conversation goes away. And lighting right now is what I like to call natively digital. So it's by default digital. It's an interesting step. So when it's natively digital, it becomes a platform for services, and essentially, let's call them apps or whatever. So that room with empathy and room with sense of humor can tomorrow be, room with something else. Room with panic attack.
So that sort of opens up an interesting, the idea of a physical built space taking on human emotions, that's been explored before. I think in the current sort of conversation today, I see AI as a way of starting to address that. But how might you, what are some of the things that you envision in each of your respective viewpoints, research, architecture, art, lighting, looking at this? Is it possible for a space to be able to start to sense the nuanced essence of light to create these range of emotions for a space?
In a lot of ways, I don't think we need to really even reinvent the wheel. We just had Randy this morning talk about, his fantastic projects and the one about Martin Luther King, where every piece of lighting artifact was planned and programmed to create emotions, and how people would prefer to go and visit the space at night than in the day, because it gives them a complete different experience. So all of this is part, I do believe you asked a question before about how is this changing for lighting designer. So part of it, it's all there. It's all in the semantic and the lexicon of lighting designers, of designing for human emotion, designing for human interaction. But on the other side, Tapio, he's probably the best example, where he's bringing so many different things into the so-called traditional lighting design world. And he's doing comfortably exactly because he said he abolished all those things. So for him, it's not why not, why not, why not. But the majority of people that we work with, and even within our profession, between even the lighting designers and the lighting engineers, and trying to make those two different people, when in fact, if they're working within the same frame opportunity, then they can really interact and interplay. So I do think that the opportunity is there. It's just a matter of listening to these things that are happening around us, and it's either through foreshadow, or we call it co-creating and signify, or it's through many different ways, but to try and create that space for those conversations to happen with the different people that can really have an impact, and they will become a part. Co-creation is about co-ownership, so they'll become a part of that solution, of that situation. One
of the points that was raised this morning was, in a world of sort of design and research, it's very easy to sort of talk about these issues and explore these ideas. But what are the steps to start making this more of a kind of integrated reality in every design project, no matter the scale or the budget? So how are you, has it come up yet? Are you sort of rethinking the approach to discussions with clients to sort of make this notion, these capabilities, not so scary or seem like some kind of, extra add-on to a project?
So there are two terminologies that we use in describing the projects, and this morning we talked about the 5 phases, but in essence, its first one is value-sensitive design or value-driven design, and then the second part is scenario-based design. So first one is through foreshadowing, co-creation, we call it unfocusing. We try to unfocus from the main focus problem, try to understand what are the kind of inherent human values that we can try to leverage. So a lot of this value-sensitive design approaches go back to the shared human values that we can really anchor into as we develop technology. Because technology is a tool, it's a means to get there. What's going to remain in the future, regardless of where technology is going to be, AI, machine learning, all of these things, is the human value. So we want to make sure that we carry on that human value. To show these ideas in the future, it's hard to describe. So what we then do is through scenario-based design, we create scenarios using, could be personas, but also trying to make sure that these personas are very well-rounded. It's not just a stereotype that you design with, but with the real human characteristics that we can design and put them in the future context to show that these are the kind of the various human emotions that the product or the service or the experience can elicit in a user. So we can discuss both the positive side as well as the negative potential impacts that the technology can bring in the future. So these two kind of the side-to-side two tools really help us to envision the future, to create these design visions, and also to communicate with the larger public.
And do you find that clients are able to sort of have a better conceptual understanding than of where you want to go on a project when you lay out that kind of roadmap?
Yeah, I think so. Because when we talk about technologies in the future, it's very it's not going. It seems very far ahead and doesn't really seem to relate to us in the current context. But through these scenarios, it looks like it's today. We try to show these, storytelling and these videos that it's the current context, but then what we're seeing is an enhanced technology that enables this. And through that, we can see that it's not something to be afraid of. And there are benefits, pros and cons, as well as things that for us to think about, whether it's surveillance, privacy, ethical concerns, and all of that. And the stories can unveil these issues for us to discuss as designers, decision makers, and technologists.
One thing I was hoping each of you could expand on in a second is from your particular viewpoint as artists, lighting specialists, architect, manufacturer, the sort of specific knowledge set that you bring because you're evaluating projects sort of primarily first through that lens, but you know how it connects to the other aspects of a project. What are some of the things that you want to make sure that you're directly communicating to a client for a potential project so that these steps getting towards these new realities can be put into effect?
Well, rule number 1, never ask, pitch. So if you ask a client, you're asking an amateur to make a decision. Like when I go to a 3-star Michelin restaurant, the chef doesn't ask me anything. I'm super happy what I'm getting, and I'm letting myself go for that experience. So if you ask, you put them in a difficult position where they are looking for that safety space for themselves, and they have to answer very carefully. Whereas you don't ask. And definitely don't ask the people. I mean, never ask the crowd. My goodness, what you get. It's like a TripAdvisor. The best restaurant in in Madrid, according to TripAdvisor, if you search in English, is McDonald's. It's one of the culinary centers of Europe. So never ask the masses. So it is you pitch to them, you excite them, you give them a new idea, you get them confident, and they allow you to go with it. So that's the skills that you bring in. You are the professional, they are not.
So what's interesting about that, I think underlying most of our discussions, whether it's this one or any other panel that we've been on, there's a very traditional structure in terms of the kind of architecture, build, construction process, in terms of the way different parties come to the table and are hired. And so things are slowly starting to change, but still fundamentally, I think we've all experienced this, and this will be something good for the audience to think about as we open it up to the audience a bit later on. But ultimately, it's still the client that has first and foremost come to you, hired you.
Well, I mean, I'd like to disagree respectfully with Tapio. And it's because, and this is, I think it comes from my teaching background, is that to get people to be engaged in learning new things, I follow this through in my professional practice when I'm with a client and I'm trying to get them to go the extra mile or go the extra $100,000. Whatever it is, without including them in a skillful way, and this is where it's tricky, you have to be very careful about how you do it, and at the same time not be patronizing, be totally genuine about it, but be very skillful in how you do it. I think it's really important to give the client or the customer a sense that they're engaged in this as much as you are, that they're going to be invested in this. You need them to be invested in this for them in order to move forward with confidence and to leave that room feeling more excited than when they came in. And so showing them projects that are already done. Of course, we all have projects that were by early adopters, people that did take that plunge and did have a good budget and did some really exciting work. You can use that to show, of course, people that are a little nervous. And in the absence of that, you model and maybe imagine good scenarios or early adopting scenarios. But for me, I think, and I tried to practice this in my own work, I try very carefully to involve the client, or in your case, specifiers, I imagine, in how are they going to, in what part do they have in this? And it's tricky. I know it's hard, but that's really what I try to do.
But you engage them.
Oh yeah.
You don't ask them what to do. You engage them.
Absolutely. No. I see what you mean. Yes.
Yeah.
No. I do.
You don't put them in a position of decision making
No.
about things they actually can't make decisions about. That's the thing. Is like, if you ask them, the end result will be bad.
Oh yeah.
And 99% of our contracts ask us to do bad lighting. Can you do bad lighting for us? We will pay you 50,000, and we refuse. So we smuggle these other things, and in the end, of course, you play the workshop
skillful.
Around in a way that
Right.
they think it was their idea, and you pat them on the back, and that's
But you have their full investment. Then they're fully invested.
exactly.
Then that's priceless.
But never ever ask them to what to do.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the consultancy. If you become a consultant like that and you start asking too much, you end up consulting to them on how to reach the end result that they asked for, which is poor.
So Tapio, dare I ask you, what is a good client in your estimation?
I am. No, the good.
Who is a good client?
No,
in your estimation?
no. There are really great clients, and it is obviously the ones who are experienced enough and open-minded enough to actually trust the process. Don't even have to trust me or my company. Trust the process. Go with the process, and be ready to try to use the light to answer problems that it wasn't used to answer before. Simple as that. And then you should be also professional enough to and humble enough to say, okay, I know this much. Here's the experimental bit. let's do it as a pilot, let's try it, let's test it. Let's see, maybe it doesn't work the first 3 months, but let's do this, let's do it. So you design in a process that allows for innovation to take off.
Right, and
during the
also
process.
who's comfortable with the unknown.
Yeah.
So be okay with not having a deliverable, not having a final defined outcome in the beginning, but through this process that you can define it together. So.
We within the Signify design team, we end up, of course, a lot of the times we're designing products. And for that, we need to have the participation of people that are going to install it, use it, apply it, make it work. But a lot of the situations we're being called also, it's about trying to help lighting designers and others how to navigate this of the realm of the possible. And one of the things that I try to understand is what moment you are in the project, because that moment does dictate many times the type of conversations that you can have. And sometimes you are in the moment of the project where all you need to do is really get that piece of lighting into the place. But the earlier sometimes you can engage with the customer, the more you can be open and talk about the possibilities and engage all the things that lighting can do to solve problems that sometimes have not been identified, or if they've been identified, but there is no understanding that lighting could actually help. And unless you have that space, you have that time, you have those tools, then the engagement, the co-create, the unfocus, then a lot of it gets more complicated.
So to that point, because I've always thought as designers, in some ways we're advanced scouts, right? You have to envision, imagine for the client something they can't yet see. So in terms of each of your backgrounds, what is sort of the next project, if you could work on or imagine anything and the ways in which lighting could begin to bridge this gap and really start to move the conversation on the Internet of People forward? Is there something that you've been dreaming about doing?
Here we are looking at you again, Yihyun.
This is something that we've been kind of thinking as a lab, what we would like to do. And one is exploring all the spectrum of emotions. How can we, as we go into designing with human-robot interactions or with HCI or new types of material surfaces, apart from making all of our products and devices human-like, can these new devices, robots, and new forms of interaction create its own language to communicate emotions? I don't know if we can call it emotions, but what these intelligent systems may be thinking, and can we communicate that through haptics, texture, motions, or even light? And I think light plays a big part because that's something that we see and then we respond very immediately to the changes of light. So that's something that we are looking into exploring through kind of ideation, brainstorming, and then also kind of prototyping some of these tangible interactions.
And how does sort of user interface come into maybe some of the ways that all of you are thinking? Because ultimately, you can design the most sophisticated system, but if the users that it's designed for can't decipher how to use it, then your work sort of goes nowhere.
That's where all the hard work is, right? In the simplicity
also the fun.
on this side of complexity,
Yeah.
I wouldn't give what was that, Oliver Wendell Holmes? For the simplicity on this side of complexity, I wouldn't give a fig, but for the simplicity on the other side of complexity, I would give my life.
Yes. And I think that part of the work that we're also doing tomorrow with the Burlington sessions is around this. On one extreme, we're seeing a lot of lighting installation, let's call it that are closed. There's somebody that has the key and only that person accesses that, and it's their canvas. And on the other side, there's more and more open systems and communities being involved and lighting being used as a way to bring people together. But in between, designers, different sorts of designers, together with lighting designers, need to design the right systems, the right tools to allow things to be done that do not become an assault on other people's freedoms and understanding of aesthetics and this, and that. So what are those things? What are those? Some of them will be very open, some of them be very simple. The simpler, the better. But my big take for the next years is to simplify this conversation, this language of lighting, so that more people, more businesses can actually articulate and talk this new language of lighting.
Yeah.
So you need to get down to the basics. And if you just give people the Lego pieces, but you don't inspire them about what they can do with it, it's really not going to work. So we need to all figure out what is it that we need to do so that, you know, that inspiration then can help people become the best that they can do.
I have a little thing to add to that. My dream in this is this world that just becomes somehow incredibly intuitive. And light has that peripheral quality, which I believe in strongly, that it's very unexploited. So it hasn't been exploited enough as a design language, so design for the peripheral only. There's a great book, I was thinking about it earlier, I was talking to someone, I couldn't remember the name, but it was called Attention Merchants. And almost all the innovation that has really penetrated very heavily to all of our lives in the last 10, 15 years has been very much focused on grabbing your attention and maintaining it. So as long as possible to keep your attention on something. And then that whole famous dopamine loop on Facebook with the cat pictures and everything, it is about grabbing the attention. Now, I want exact opposite. So that the services and the things that will make my life better does not require any attention from me, and therefore does not require any kind of user interface.
Yep.
There is no user interface. It's just there, the same way as the air is, and the natural light is, and it's full of these sort of sudden surprises and things, unexpected events, but it's not, doesn't exist for you to pay attention to. That would be, I think, the dream.
That's the simplicity on the
world.
other side of complexity, right?
Yeah,
Perhaps.
that sounds
It's-
really complicated.
It's
Well, you'll explain to me after.
So does that mean that there's some way to, because when we think about lighting, I think so far we've been talking in terms of, let's say, electric light. But, you know, we have something called the sun, which is sort of the most primary of sources. So is there, in this sort of new thinking about how we can create these human-centric experiences and spaces, do you see a sort of return to using natural light, daylight, as sort of a more fundamental source?
One of the, we're exploring different thematics and trying to work with different people. One of them, the strongest one probably, and actually we have just made steps within Signify to transform that into a body of knowledge and even a business. It's called bringing nature inside, or biophilic lighting, or whatever you want to be calling it. But it's really recognizing the impact that nature and natural light have on people, and try to understand what is the right balance, what is the right merger, what is the right handshake between lighting and light, and how can that happen? And sometimes it can be something as simple as transforming the beauty of, you know, what's happening in nature, the variability of nature, into lighting, which today is very coded, static, and very constant. Sometimes it might be really just opening a window and understanding that the light then needs to behave in a different way than when the window opens. But there is a clear recognition of the impact of that, and there are people just working specifically on making that something tangible, because this is also another conversation that's been around for a while, but when it comes down to it, it becomes hard to materialize when you start building an office and you close the windows and everything is artificial lighting, you know?
How do you keep this conversation, though, grounded, though, in terms of that focus? Because often what happens is there's certain terminology that gets picked up in marketing terms. I'm sure we've all seen there's been this trend towards the use of the, dare I say, circadian lighting, and then it sort of starts to take the intent, the products, the technology off in some different paths, which maybe is not what it was intended. So how do you keep these conversations grounded, and how do all of you, we, within the lighting community, continue to lead this conversation and not have other communities drive the conversation?
Well, I don't think you can keep them necessarily very crowded, because that's the whole definition of hype. No? So we all want the magic pill and the simple solution and the simple, and when somebody comes and says, well, all you need to do is this and this and this, and then suddenly you sleep better and work harder and la-di-da-di-da, then, it's very attractive. And I think the risk there simply is that we all become snake oil merchants, and then somebody does some kind of a all-encompassing test and realizes that, oh, cup of coffee had a much bigger effect than the lighting did. But so we need to, I think, exactly maintain the very kind of true and let's say skeptical position as the professionals. So the professional view is that we don't quite know enough yet, but you could try this. That, I think, is maybe the more important one, rather than drink the Kool-Aid and believe the hype. But it's, at the same time, super normal. It's very human. It's very natural for that sort of thing to happen, because otherwise, you never get this uptake anyway. I don't think, maybe we don't even need to be so worried about it. And the other thing is this whole daylight thing. I mean, excluding daylight from a lighting conversation is completely moronic. I mean, it's oxymoronic, They have to be always together, and I think there's a lot really exciting opportunities along the lines of digital daylight, digital sunlight. So in other words, it is that sun, it is that light, but you manipulate it in digital means. Because during that Li-Fi conversation, I started thinking, like, why don't we just put an electrochromic filter on a window and start, flickering it like that, and that's your Li-Fi. It's a beam of sun, but it carries million megabytes. Because end of the day, you could do it, no? Theoretically speaking, why not? And so on and so forth. So start actually manipulating daylight in an exciting and fun way. That would be great.
So
Sky-Fi.
I think
Sunfi.
one of the
Sunfi.
important things is a conversation like this is a starting point. There need to be more conversations like this, I think, generally among people within the lighting community. Is there any other sort of discipline or area of research that you see that's serving as a good role model or not a good role model for that could sort of aid in the lighting community's navigating
I do think
these
it's
discussions?
important. Yeah, I do think it's important to not ignore history and to look at other emerging technologies and think about what happened when those were presented. I know the circumstances were different for the Industrial Revolution or for other revolutions that have taken place. But there are certain things that always stay true because we're still always human. And so I think it might be interesting to look at some things that we might want to avoid, or some things that, some lessons that we could learn from some of those other emerging, as other technologies emerged.
I mean, certainly you don't have to look that far in the past to compact fluorescent light bulbs and some of the missteps that occurred and how that was accepted by the public. I know when solid-state lighting first emerged, there was a concerted effort to sort of avoid some of the mistakes in terms of that as a product launch. But was wondering, as a whole, if there was any particular discipline. I mean, there's so much transformation that the lighting industry has experienced over the last, say, 15 to 17 years. It's sort of unprecedented. But was wondering from each of your seats if there's some parallel you see with another industry. Photography comes to mind.
I guess where I see this a lot in financial industry. So if you look at the kind of structure of financial industry, it's actually very conservative, very solid, very established. And now there's been a massive boom on fintech, as it's called. And that has sprouted this enormous amount of little startups, which they just have like a new, slightly different angle to some part of that that huge industry and so a problem. And it's creating huge amount of movement and things and revolutions and jobs and goodness what. So I think we should be inspired by that kind of thinking, is that we have an industry that's quite old, quite solid in some ways still, let's say, but equally quite conservative. And then there's this group of influencers that this room is full of, would be right now in a prime position to do what those little startups in fintech have been doing, is like start scraping the surface with innovation. So we should start innovating. The design studios should all become like startups to try to disrupt some aspects of this old industry in order to build it up again.
Yeah.
And building on top of that, in the financial industry, we're also seeing open banking as a big initiative happening in Europe and also in South America, maybe in the US, not sure. But with that, we're seeing now the big banks trying to move into this innovation field, trying to be out there first as this new open banking comes in. So how can, and I think that goes back to the whole idea of the open sourcing. So can we open up and invite the masses to come and design and play with us to design new language, or maybe create common language among the designers, lighting designers, and architects.
Yeah. One of the industries I pay close attention just because the more I read about it, the more I understand there's parallels, is the whole electric car industry revolution, which is not picking up as fast as some people expected, and the reasons why, I think there's a lot of parallels. Also, the whole revolution of thinking of a car, which is something that is built around batteries and not around an engine, there's a lot of analogies there. And also, what suddenly an electric car, especially if you put autonomous on top of it, what it allows human beings to do is just suddenly a very interesting conversation about the domains of people around lighting, that whenever lighting becomes sophisticated to a point of helping us do a lot of these things. So I do pay a lot of attention. There's also a lot of fear there. There's a lot of industry, oligarchy, not letting a lot of the other smaller ones doing. So I do find that there's a lot of stuff there that we can look at and learn. It's something that's happening more or less at the same time, so that's, you don't have the hindsight of it, but I think there's quite a lot of it that we tend to, at least I tend to look at it to try to understand some of the things that are happening.
Mm-hmm. The future always arrives more quickly than we expect it to. Even within the next, let's say, 1 to 3 years, are there seeds of things that you're starting to see now that you would not be surprised if they come online rather quickly?
I think with regards to lighting, there's quite a few people in this room that know probably what's going to be coming out in the next 2 to 3 years, because it takes sometimes, unfortunately, that long to get things going to a certain point. I think that more and more to have a connected system that doesn't need to scream or say it, but it's just naturally connected and allows to do more things, and to put on top of it things that people really need, want, and are ready to pay for, is something that will happen. I do think that on the other extreme of the needle, I think that the conversations about quality of light, and a little bit what Tapio was saying, which is where is the truth about what does light do to people in the next 2 to 3 years, it'll become you will be able to distinguish better who actually is being serious about this whole conversation about lighting, and who is actually being also cherishing the beauty of the quality of lighting, instead of just saying, let it all go.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a returning to basics. So I think that those three things, they're very close, and I think that we will be seeing more of it in the next 2 to 3 years.
Technology-wise, maybe we say AI in general, but then if you unpack AI, I think with machine learning and computer vision, a lot of research and money is going into computer vision. And I think that's going to maybe enhance the way that our surrounding, our environment senses us. So not just our movements, but our pulsation. Maybe through cameras, we can see that your heart's beating fast because we can detect those, those motions. So instead of leveraging on biometrics, maybe our environments can sense size more intelligently. We also have to think about privacy issues, but I think that will maybe change, also enhance the way we interact with light. Maybe the light can also respond to us as a person. Yep.
And I think there's I would certainly expect that within 2 to 3 years, which is this shift where lighting begins to represent a hardware platform. So, or like hardware infrastructure, let's call it that way. But the real value and the services and the cost, the money, is actually to do with software-based interventions on top of that hardware platform. So a lot of the big players like you guys, Signify or Osram or Zoomterwell, and these guys, they're starting to put a lot of focus on software development, which makes obviously perfect sense, which could lead, maybe not in 3 to 5 years, but eventually to a point where hardware is, for example, free. And you just pay various kinds of different types of subscriptions. So this whole kind of SaaS model, which has been, to be honest, discussed for a while, but this boat doesn't turn so fast. So another 2 to 3 years, and there's some kind of lighting as a service, or like selling lumens, or call it what you like, content management aspect, I think will become much more prolific, and the major revenue stream, basically.
I'd like to walk into a room and not have to say, Alexa, turn on the lights or whatever. I'm tired of voice commands, and I've actually put our Alexas to bed. They don't exist. They're not awake anymore. I don't. Yeah, no. Put them in the cupboard. I disconnected them. They're in the cupboard. I'm tired of that. I want to skip that part of the process, and I want to walk into a room where. Like Tapio, I want to walk into a room and it understands who I am, what music I like to play, it understands what lighting I want, it understands the time of the day, the time of the year, and who else is in the room with me. I think all of that's quite possible. It's possible now, right? So in terms of artwork, I think wanting my work to engage with people is going to change. In the past, I meant that in a traditional way where people would walk up to the artwork and go, oh, that speaks to me. It's very, I feel something special when I look at that. It makes me feel this. They'll physically engage with it. I think they'll be making things happen. And artists will talk about engaging with people in a really new way. And they're beginning to already, but it'll be much more pervasive.
I think that's a great way to bring this conversation to a close until the next time we convene to start talking about this again. So I want to thank the panelists again for their insight and perspective, and thank all of you and the Signify team for bringing us all together and creating this wonderful event. So thank you.
Thank you.